The first committee meeting for Governmental Affairs for 2006 and the first televised committee meeting for Government Affairs ever, I believe. Today we're going to take up the House Committee substitute to Senate Bill 84. Representative Barry Fleming is going to present it, and Representative Fleming, after you speak and we see the presentation of the equipment, I'm going to allow the senator that is the author of the bill to speak as well. And for everybody's reference, we're working from LC 1493339S. Is that correct, Representative Fleming? Thank you. Representative Fleming, we're ready when you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me apologize for my voice. I'm trying to get over that same bug that everybody else seems to have, so I'm going to try to keep the microphone as close to me as I can for as long as my voice lasts. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, I bring to you today a proposed House substitute to Senate Bill 84, which deals with Georgia's voter ID law. As everybody knows, last session, the House and Senate and the governor signed into law a comprehensive bill dealing with Georgia's election law and specifically addressing the voter ID issue. As most people are also aware, a federal judge out of Rome, Georgia, installed a temporary injunction against one part of the bill, only one part of the bill dealing with the voter ID issue. The judge identified three perceived problems he had with that ID law that we passed last year, and this substitute addresses each of those concerns of the judge. Let me first of all go through with you those three areas, and then I'll take you line by line through the bill and show you what the changes are, and then certainly try to answer any question that the chairman of the committee has. First of all, the bill begins the process of a voter education program to inform Georgia of these voting guidelines and the other changes that may be made. Secondly, it addresses the issue of the cost of a photo ID by making an ID absolutely free to anyone without an already acceptable form of voter ID. Third, it addresses the accessibility of obtaining a photo ID by making them available in every county in Georgia at the same place a person goes to register to vote, that being the registrar's office. Now, if you would, turn to the substitute, and I'll take you through the pertinent parts of the bill. Mr. Chairman, as we begin on page 1, section 1, this is just current law, which outlines the duties of the State Elections Board. The operative part is on page 2, line 9, where this addresses the education part that I discussed a second ago. As you can see, line 23, subsection 9, subject to funds being specifically appropriated by the General Assembly to formulate and conduct a voter education program concerning the voting procedures for voting by absentee ballot and at the polls, with particular emphasis on the type of identification required for voting. As I mentioned, that addresses the part that the judge had concern about Georgia's being aware of these changes. Now, section 2 of the bill deals with the current law on the proper ID used to vote at the polls. And on page 3, line 5, subsection 2, the new language simply adds in this new form of ID that we're about to talk about today. If you flip over to page 4, this is the meat of the proposal of the substitute, and this is where a new form of ID for voting is created. Subsection A there simply states that these IDs will be free, no charge whatsoever. Section B says that only you can get this card if you don't already have another form of voter ID, such as the driver's license or the other forms of ID that are available under the current law for voting. Subsection C of this portion of the bill prescribes the way in which the law, provides the law for the way the actual card will look. It'll be a laminated card, have a digital photography picture of the voter, and also, as you can see there in subsections 1 through 10, have the kind of information that will be obtained on the card. Subsection under C10 allows the State Election Board to add other information as may be necessary to the voter ID card. Subsection D goes into the concept that giving false information on this card for its publication is a false swearing and punishable by law. Subsection E of the bill tells what is required of the voter to get this free voter ID card. Number one there under Section E, beginning on line 35, says that you can have another kind of photo identity document, such as maybe a photo identity from work, a student ID card. It also says that you can have a non-photo identity document as long as it includes your full name, legal name, and your date of birth. Also required on line 37, subsection 2, would be documentation showing the person's date of birth. If you flip over to the next page 5 of the bill, you'll see where proof of a person's social security number is required. And also the last item, number 4 on line 2, documentation showing the person's name and their principal residence address. Subsection F on line 3 simply states that if you move or have a change of address, then the card you have is not valid and you'll have to submit that card and get a new one. Subsection D, beginning on line 7, is the part where we will appropriate funds and give the State Board of Elections the ability to purchase the equipment which is needed to go out to the registrars in all 159 counties. This type of equipment is very similar to that which you've seen when you go into Sam's or Costco's, for example. You simply stand there and they snap a photo of you and then a card spits out in probably less than a minute with the information on there. Subsection H on page 5 allows the State Election Board to adopt new guidelines if necessary and rules to deal with the voter ID card. The last part of the substitute that I bring to you today, section 3 on page 5, addresses the concern that there was any cost involved with getting an ID card under current law from a Department of Driver Services. As you can see on line 24, we strike the language concerning paying a fee, and that card is also absolutely free. It's a pretty simple substitute. That is the basics of it, and rather than me go on any further, I'll certainly, Mr. Chairman, try to answer any questions of the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, in a very, very, very quick look at this, perceive that this bill is intended to provide some improvements to the law that has been struck down by the court. But in that the court order is over 100 pages long, I respectfully ask the opportunity to review this bill at least for a day before I'm asked to vote on it. I really think I would like to look at the court order and review this legislation in detail. I think it'd be irresponsible of me to vote without a real analysis of the court order and this improvement. For instance, Mr. Chairman, or I'll ask Mr. Fleming, it's great that you're removing the cost of the photo ID, but you're not removing the cost of getting the birth certificate, which is $8 in Georgia or $10 in Georgia, and it could be $20 in Connecticut. It takes 1 week to 10 weeks to get. What about the ancillary cost?
I think the way I would respond to that, Representative, is nor are we providing gas for people to get to the polls, nor are we providing any other things which are necessary for one to go to the polling votes. We don't pass a law saying that your employer has to let you off at a certain time. We could go on ad infinitum with the amount of things that we could do to make it possible to go vote, but you have to draw a reasonable line somewhere. Most people in the state have a birth certificate. If they don't have a birth certificate and haven't needed it sometime in their life, they probably have had to come up with something with their birth date on it.
Mr. Fleming, you're kind of young. 70% of World War II veterans don't have a birth certificate. If that's a true fact, I believe it's a true fact. Those are the people that we most want to vote. I believe you agree at this time of war.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask this question about your question.
One of the ancillary costs.
Where do you see in here that a birth certificate is required?
Well, as you
Maybe
know,
I'm missing that.
the penalties are that in order to get a voter ID, you got to prove your date of birth. And in fact, you have to, in your bill, I
Well, quite often court orders contain people's birth dates. If we sat here long enough, we could probably come up with several things that contain people's birth date. I know.
Chairman, I respectfully ask an opportunity on behalf of the folks that are engaged in this debate, like the legal and others, an opportunity to review this bill before we vote on it.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Fleming, Chairman. I have a couple of questions about accessibility, just to clarify some things.
Certainly.
When we're saying it's accessible, we're talking every business day that the office is open. Is that, am I right in understanding that?
Yeah, every day the registrar's office, which would be open for you to go and register to vote, they would also be open with this machine to make a voter ID card for
So
you.
there's not like a pre-time to go in, so it's any day of the year that is the business day? It would be
Any
open.
day of the year.
Okay. And then the, one further question, Mr. Chair. My husband is a Vietnam vet, but it's my experience, the probably the most ID'd people in the world are our veterans. I mean, they're going to have all kind of documentation, and especially if they're a veteran. So
One of my jobs when my dad was sick, because he was a veteran, he went to VA hospital, was to keep up with all the documents he had to bring with him every time he went.
right,
And it was literally a folder full.
right. And if, I mean, it's just something they're going to have if they're a veteran.
Right.
Thank you.
I want to ask that we all speak into the microphone so that it can be recorded and sent out over the internet for the public to understand. Representative Geisinger.
Mr. Fleming, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fleming, what is the estimated cost of this to the state?
Of the ID machines?
Yes.
Somewhere between, right now we have 159 counties, and the cost is a little over $1,000, we believe, for the equipment. It's not very expensive because technology has come so far with this type of stuff. So we think probably somewhere around $150,000, at the tops maybe $200,000 for the equipment. We also suspect if we bought in bulk, we might even get a better price than that. It's very, very cost efficient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? Representative Powell, would you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my colleague, I have to compliment y'all. This is a far better attempt than it was last year on trying to do this. Question on page 4, line 7. No person shall be eligible for a Georgia voter ID card if such person has a valid unexpired driver's license. What's the purpose of that? If they have an unexpired driver's license, which is common, or if they have an unexpired ID card, they may not. And if I understand the gist of what the courts had said in putting a stay on this, why would that language be necessary?
Well, the idea here is that, of course, if you have a valid driver's license, you don't need this voter ID card because that can serve as your identification when you go vote. And we don't want to put, if we didn't have language like that in there, then literally everyone in the state could go in and try to get one of these cards. And our attempt is not to overrun our registrar's office with business, but simply make one more opportunity open for those people who don't already have a valid form of ID for which they can use to vote. Did I make myself clear there, Representative Powell?
Maybe I may be more confused than I was.
That does not say, that line does not address the fact if you have an expired card. It's talking about a valid driver's license, which is unexpired. In other words, it's a valid driver's license. And if you already have a proper form of ID,
Right, I understand if you've got one that is proper. But now, am I reading this backward when it says unexpired?
Unexpired is another word for valid. It just quite often
Got it written in
lawyers
the
put two words together that mean the same
got
thing.
it written
just
in the
to put more
legalese
emphasis on it.
term,
Right,
so it's
that's
always
right.
backwards.
That's
then.
right. That's right.
Second question, please, Mr. Chairman. In the process of this, Mr. Fleming, I had concerns last year. One of my concerns was on the voter ID bill and the methodology. I had no problem, and I have no problems with a photo identification if it is provided at an easy process. As my colleague from Decatur said a while ago, there are some other problems about people who don't have birth certificates, and trust me, it's a whole lot easier to do a lot of things than to get a birth certificate if you don't have one. And I've got problems. Has the leadership that's submitting this proposition, have they considered, since they're going ahead and apparently providing the adequate funds, or hopefully it'll be adequate to the local boards, so that those local boards can identify those people? They know who these people are. If you have a voter registration card now, and you just don't have the voter ID, why would we not simplify this process of saying that anyone who needs a ID for voting purpose, that local sworn board of election registrars, that they can issue carte blanche a voter registration card with a photo ID?
Well, in a sense, that's exactly what this bill does. And as I mentioned on the first page of the bill, it shows there where the General Assembly can appropriate funds for a voter educational program. And just as you mentioned, those registrars are the folks in the counties who are probably going to know best where they need to go to find people who might need the service. And I feel certain that our State Board of Elections would consider using them when they go out there and take some funds that we would give them and try to educate people on what they actually need to vote. I think that could be an integral part of it. So I appreciate your question. I think we're trying to address that.
All right, so what you're saying is, with this process, that basically anyone can go in there if they've got to show a certain form ID to these sworn
just
election.
Like you do to register to vote. I mean, you have to show
Right.
some ID. Right.
One other question, if I might.
One other, and then I've got others.
One other question. Also, in the same tone last year, while I said last year in this very same committee that I have no problem with a photo ID, as I think most people don't, if it is an easy process. Last year, I had major concerns that I thought that the photo ID part was actually the Trojan horse behind something that I had other problems. Having sat on this committee for numerous years, some of the other provisions that, as I understand, was accepted by the court, since they only dealt with excluding the photo ID, with other provisions that extended and expanded absentee voting from the 10 to 45 days with no excuse, with no ID, and also did away with the voting the day before voting for people who on short notice may have been called out of town. Now they can't vote. Would the leadership consider amending and adding that language back in to clarify, so as to prevent this expansion of where voter fraud really occurs, which is in the absentee process?
I don't think so, and let me explain to you why, and I disagree with the premise of your question. There is an ID identification form when you vote absentee ballot. In fact, a very good one. It's called your signature. There's a signature and a paper trail, and you can't get a absentee ballot unless you sign for it. And there's a process there, usually with enough time for registrars, if they're doing their duty, to follow up on that and check for fraud. So there's a paper trail there when you vote by absentee ballot. And so, this does not address that issue, and I don't think we would want to.
So the leadership would not be wanting to really address this issue of the absentee process.
I think that's another debate for another day. And certainly during this session, if anybody thought that we needed to, they could introduce a bill and try to move forward with it. And I'm sure that we'd listen to your arguments.
Would you?
But not on this bill.
Would you, as the one handling this bill, I don't know what the intent is, but would y'all be willing to allow that to the full floor debate for amendment purposes? Or will this be one of those that will be locked down, that we have no other choice but to vote it up or down?
Well, there's no doubt that this will be open for amendment in several stages, including the one that we're right here today. Now, whether I would support that amendment would be a different thing. When this bill comes to the Rules Committee, that'll be a different discussion for the Rules Chairman, and he'll be making that decision, I assume, at that time. But the amendment process is open today. It'll be open in the Rules Committee on the floor. I don't know that any decision has been made on that at this point. But no, I do not think the House leadership would be supportive of diving into another area of the voting law. Our concern with this one was to address the concerns of the judge with the parts that he enjoined.
Even though last year, all of this was handled at the same time in one bill.
Last year it was a general overhaul. That's not our intention to do a general overhaul this year, but to address the one thing that the judge had a problem with.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to allow 2 more questions, and then we're going to look at the equipment, and then we're going to let the senator that's the author of the bill, Senator Stanton, speak on the bill as well. Representative Oliver.
I'm also concerned about absentee voting issues, which I believe are very significant at the center of fraud analysis in the state. I have introduced a bill, though, that would allow early voting, and I've not been allowed an opportunity for hearing on that. Would you object to an amendment to this bill that allows early voting expanded to 2 weeks instead of only 1 week that's allowed right now?
I wouldn't object to discussing with you that topic at another time, but my feelings are the same as I mentioned to Representative Powell, that our concerns with this bill was to narrowly address the concerns of the federal court under that. So no, I would not support any amendments like that to this particular bill.
So we don't have a definitive answer whether I'll be allowed that amendment on the floor of the House, and I have not been allowed an opportunity to have this committee vote on early voting, and you would not allow or would suggest to your colleagues that would not be allowed to amend the bill today in relation to early voting. So that sums it up all the ways I'm blocked.
Once again, our intent with this bill is to address what the court did and narrowly keep it at that. As this legislative process knows, and you know better than I do because you've been at it a lot longer than I have, there'll be ample opportunity for any representative or senator for that matter to introduce bills on the process about things they think are
This
important.
is my final comment, Mr. Chairman. There's several different ways I've been prevented from a vote or a discussion on early voting. And since I have been at this a while, and since I am respectful of the judiciary as a lawyer for 30 years, I request the opportunity to look at the court's decision and compare it to your bill today for at least 24 hours before I'm obligated to vote on this bill.
The one thought that comes to that, Mr. Chairman, is that this issue has been on the front page a lot, on the front burner since that court took action many, many months ago. And the opportunity to read the judge's order have been days upon weeks upon months. I think anybody interested in this could have done that. This is a very short, simple bill. We have the opportunity to discuss it fully now, and I'd like for us to move ahead at the appropriate time.
With all due respect, I've read the decision, but I was handed this as I walked in the room. And I would prefer an opportunity to be a little bit more cautious on something as important as the right to vote.
Representative Oliver, as the chair of the Governmental Affairs Committee, and you're certainly one of the respected members of this committee, I can assure you that if you want a hearing on a piece of legislation that you have on early voting, that we will have that hearing.
Thank you. I respectfully ask at this time that the committee's convenience, I'd like an opportunity on early voting.
We will do that for you. Representative Burmeister.
Just a friendly question. Isn't it true that there are currently 2 million more valid IDs in the state of Georgia than actual registered voters?
I think you're exactly right. You know, we're really talking about a very narrow section right here that people we're trying to help who don't have the proper ID. And it's a shame. You would hope there would be more people registered to vote than there would be people driver's license issued. But no, you're exactly right. There are 2 million more driver's license issued than there are people that registered to vote.
Thank you. I had said two, but I have one last question from somebody that has not asked yet. So, Representative Scheid.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, Mr. Fleming. Is there, I didn't see it, and it's probably been considered by the leadership, is there a need to have a time certain that the photo ID is good for, and then we need to renew it because folks change? I know I used to look a little different.
I think if you came in and you had changed that much, the registrar would probably give an example for you and let you have a new one. Obviously, if you moved, there would be a new address that would be needed on there. But no, the intent was to make it pretty simple for folks to come in and not to have an expiration date on that in order to have that photo ID.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Fleming. Patrick, we're going to ask that you come up now and show us just how simple this equipment is to operate and maybe give us a quick overview of it.
Sorry. The equipment is pretty basic. It's all off-the-shelf computer hardware. Hang on a second. It's all off-the-shelf computer hardware. It's relatively easy to acquire. You just have to look for it. It's based on an administrator, attendant, visitor module, but you only have to use the administrator and the attendant. The administrator, of course, would be to go in and format the card, and if you want to preload a list, you can do that as well. So if you have 5 people call in that say they want to get their cards, they can actually call in and you can preload the list. And when they come to get it, it's all there, and it makes it much faster. But it's a pretty simple process. Inside the attendant mode, it asks you to select a visitor type. There will only be one type of visitor because it'll be for the photo ID. That will come up. It'll have all the information ready, and I just need... It might break. Okay, you're just going to enter the first name and the last name, and then you're going to enter their full legal name, which is Barry. And then a street address. I'll just use a copy. And it's going to ask for the city, state, and zip, of course. And then there's a couple things that have been added in for the bill, which is height, weight, eyes, and sex. So, that would be nice.
Glad you didn't have a woman down there.
Yeah, that's why I looked at her. 6'3". 220. What's that? About 220. Okay. And this is a very basic version. Color your eyes. This is okay.
He's male.
Okay, and it basically enters all the information we need, and then we need a date of birth.
Let's put 05 01 70.
Okay.
I'm glad you're not under oath.
And then, then using a standard webcam, we get a picture of Barry there. Just hit take photo. Oh, it's a good photo. Accept photo, and then you just print the badge. Give it a second while the printer prints. But basically, it's all off the shelf. This is a 3-year-old printer. The notebook's fairly new, but it's not as big as a desktop that you would give out. You get a desktop of the same caliber for $300 to $400, and then you add in a monitor. The webcam costs $28. The printer new costs $150. It's a very inexpensive, and then you just have to buy the refills for the badges, and that should be ready in a second.
And just to reiterate, my understanding is that the leadership in the House is prepared to put the money in the budget to cover the cost of this equipment for the counties.
Give me just a second. And once it's printed on a double-sided card. Basically, all you do is you push through on the other side, and the laminate comes off. It's a self-laminating card. You take it, you start at the top, and it's kind of like putting tint on a window of a car. You just press it so all the bubbles are out, and it's pretty sturdy. That's it right there. That's a 2-minute process. If they call ahead early, it's less than that. All you gotta do is take the photo.
Very good photo, but I'll give it to you.
Thank you very much. Why don't we start it at that end, and then we can bring it around. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one question, and it's going to go to security. And so I assume that there are safeguards in place so that someone can't tap into this and then use it another way.
Well, yeah, the best part about the system is it's freestanding. It's not connected to the internet in any way. And anybody will tell you the only secure computer is either one that's buried underground and not plugged in, or not attached to a phone line. And it's neither. So you should be okay.
Thank you. I appreciate the way y'all have addressed the concerns.
Thank you. Senator Stanton, if you would, this is your piece of legislation, Senate Bill 84. Certainly appreciate you coming today and look forward to your comments and suggestions for the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today and to make just a few comments. I introduced Senate Bill 84 last year in the session because, having watched elections in our country over several cycles, I was concerned about the integrity of the process in Georgia. Much has been made about voter fraud in the past, but as much as I was concerned about anything that may have happened in the past, I was concerned about the integrity of our elections going forward, because I strongly believe that elections should not be decided in courtrooms by judges and lawyers, but they should be decided by the voters of the people of Georgia. And they should know that when they wake up on the day after an election, they can be assured that their vote counted, the election was free and fair, and the principle of one person, one vote has been maintained. This has been an interesting year. Many charges have been made along the way. I've had the occasion to be in many parts of our state speaking about my bill. And I will say that more often than not, I get a response similar to, well, I thought we always had to show an ID to vote in the state of Georgia. This is common sense. But I'm glad we're here today, because I think we want to make sure that it is as easy as it can be for people to get an ID. I don't think it's unreasonable that we expect people to show that they are who they say they are when they come to vote. But I'm grateful today that we have the opportunity to make a free ID more accessible around the state, not just at DDS offices around the state, but in every county in the state of Georgia. So I'm here today to say that I support what you're doing. I thank you for the opportunity to work with the leadership in the Senate, with the leadership in the House, with your committee, in order to put together what I believe is a good committee substitute, which will not only take care of the issues that the judge has raised in Rome, Georgia, but will do something that is good for the people of the state of Georgia. Free IDs, easily accessible, and yet something that will help us ensure in the state of Georgia that our elections are free and fair, the principle of one person, one vote is maintained, and that we'll not have some of those problems that other states in this great country have had in recent elections as we move forward. So those are my brief comments, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I give you my support for what it's worth, for what you're trying to accomplish today with your committee substitute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your work on this bill. Any questions? Seeing none, I'm going to... Yes, sir.
Just for my closing comments before we open it up. Here's the best way I've heard it summarized, and this is what a constituent told me. He said that if you have to, when you go to Walmart to cash a $6 check, if you have to show a photo ID, doesn't it make sense when you're going to go into the voting booth and pick the next leader of the free world, that you also show a photo ID? And that probably summed it up from the mouth of the constituent, met him in Walmart actually, of why this is so common sense. And I appreciate you allowing me to come today to present this substitute to you, and I'd ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got 8 people signed up to speak. Representative Porter and Tom Michoud, I understand that you requested to speak. Is that there was somebody from the Secretary of State's office? Okay. I'm going to ask that each of you, as we call you, kind of, if you could limit your comments to about 3 minutes. Some of us have a Ways and Means Committee meeting that we have to be at to deliver a vote on a tax cut. And so we'll start with Jennifer Owen. If you would come forward, we're looking forward to your comments.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee. Thank you so much.
Ms. Owen, if you would, since you're a lobbyist, if I'm correct,
Yes.
would you state the name of the organization that you're with?
My name is Jennifer L. Owens. I'm the executive director of the League of Women Voters of Georgia. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that has an 85-year history of protecting voter rights, encouraging civic participation in the democratic process, and working on election reform issues.
Thank you.
I'd like to first take the opportunity to thank you for taking some time to address some of the concerns that have been brought to the table as far as the voter ID bill is concerned. However, the League of Women Voters still feels that this still represents an unnecessary burden for voters' access between the ballot box and their right to vote. Although making the IDs free does address the monetary poll tax argument that was key in Judge Murphy's decision, it still does not address the accessibility issues as far as transportation is concerned, in that also county offices are only open from 8 to 5, which are normal business hours. And the folks, the impacted audience that we are essentially talking about are more than likely working jobs where they do not have the flexibility to take time off work during those hours. In addition, this law does nothing to address the fact that we are still inconsistently treating voters across the lines. It does not address any issues as far as absentee voting is concerned, as been brought to the table earlier today. Finally, although I appreciate the efforts to talk about some appropriated dollars, we are still not clear and have not been shown any consistent or clear evidence of voter impersonation fraud over the past several years. And so although we would like to iterate that the League of Women Voters is clearly in favor of safe, secure, and accessible elections, election reform does not mean that you cut voters out of the process altogether, and we feel that this bill, even in its amended form, which we have only had for about 5 minutes, still does not effectively include those voters that we are talking about. So I appreciate the efforts. However, there are still some serious issues with the poll tax associated with the accessibility issues and presenting an inconvenience for impacted audiences, as well as we're still not getting at this opportunity to, and just in looking at this closely, the section of the amended provisions talking about state funds, page 2, line 23, and I will let a lawyer to follow me clarify. It's clearly stated as subject to funds being appropriated, and although we are not in favor of this, there would need to be a guarantee in addition, because we are under such a short time schedule. This is a large election for the state of Georgia in 2006, and if this becomes law, there's a very short time frame to comply with this, and I can certainly say that you would not be able to reach every single impacted voter prior to Election Day, both for the primary and the general election.
Ms. Owen, can I ask you you're with the League of Women Voters?
Of Georgia, correct.
Of Georgia. Subsection 9 reads, subject to the funds being specifically appropriated by the General Assembly to formulate and conduct a voter education program. Is it your testimony that the League of Women Voters is against a voter education program?
Absolutely not. I'm just concerned with the word.
Ma'am, I believe that's...
I'm concerned with the word subject. We want to be assured that there is going to be adequate funds appropriated to do voter education if this becomes law, so that there is adequate time to find these individuals and provide them with the access we need.
Thank you. Any questions of the committee?
Thank you.
Next, we have Emmett Bondurant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Emmett Bondurant. I am not a lobbyist, and I do not here speak for any organization, though I am counsel of record in the pending litigation, the brief of which for the appellees goes into the Court of Appeals today. The question before the House
Mr. Chair,
is...
I wasn't clear of his, so
I'm sorry.
I didn't gather what you're trying to tell us.
I am not officially speaking from any organization.
But
I'm counsel of record in the existing litigation for the plaintiffs.
on the voter ID.
Correct.
It's before us today. Thank you.
And it is something I have spent some time, including this weekend, studying.
Excuse me. So you're the lead attorney in the case with the ruling from Judge Murphy.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me begin with a fundamental proposition that no one has addressed, including Judge Murphy's opinion, that in my opinion indicates that the problem, quote, cannot be fixed by a photo ID statute. The Georgia Constitution is very clear and very specific in saying that any citizen who is a resident of the state, who has lawfully registered in the manner prescribed by law, who is a resident at the time of the election, quote, shall be entitled to vote and may be only denied the right to vote for two reasons: conviction for a felony or an adjudication as being incompetent. That issue was not ruled on by Judge Murphy because the state objected to its being ruled on by Judge Murphy. It is a quintessential Georgia Supreme Court case, and it will ultimately result in the invalidation of this legislation no matter what changes you make. Secondly, you're addressing a problem for which there is as yet, and was not in that case, any evidence that a problem exists of fraudulent impersonation in in-person voting. There is evidence of fraud in absentee ballots, and you have assiduously refused to address that. There is evidence of fraud in voter registration, and you have assiduously refused to address that. And when you do not address those problems and try to require a photo ID for voters in an area in which there is no demonstrable problem, you will not succeed in overcoming a challenge under the federal or, in my judgment, under the state constitution. There is no evidence that the existing voter laws have not been effective. There is no evidence, as Judge Murphy found, that this is a problem. And there are other ways that this problem could be addressed, assuming there was such a problem, without burdening the right to vote of so many voters. The suggestion that there are not any voters out there who don't go to Walmart and cash checks and therefore don't have photo ID is simply flatly wrong. The governor himself said to the Atlanta Journal on April 2, 2005, that there were over 300,000 Georgians over 21 who do not have any form of photo ID. And the estimates from AARP and the League of Women Voters is that in 2004, 154,000 people over 60 actually voted who do not have Georgia's driver's licenses or other forms of photo ID. It is a real problem for real people. Assuming there is a problem, there are other ways to address it. Number one, you can do what you currently require in the case of absentee ballots. The point has been made that to get an absentee ballot, you must sign an oath. And when you send in your absentee ballot, you fill out an envelope which contains the same oath. The facts are, while that is true, every voter who goes to Georgia, goes to the polls to vote in person, fills out exactly the same oath and certificate. You fill out the form that says, Georgia, blank county, I am here to vote in a special, a runoff and so forth election. I live at the following address, and it's all under oath, and you sign your name to it. If you were concerned that there might be someone who might be able to impersonate a voter, you can use the same safeguard that you think is satisfactory in the case of absentee ballots. That is, you can compare that signature under oath with a signature on the voter registration card. That can be done electronically. You could put computer screens before the ballot is issued so that it could be called up on the screen if that were necessary. But that method is clearly available. As a practical matter, your statute says it will be effective on July 1. We all know it's got to go through justice pre-clearance, although that probably will be a formality based on the politics of the past. Whatever the effective date, there is a primary in this state in July. There is a general election in in November. There is no possibility that you could reasonably require 300,000, 100,000 voters who are already registered, who've done everything the law requires up to this point, to go anywhere to get a photo ID as a condition of voting. The Carter-Baker Commission, that does have a photo ID recommendation, pointed out the practical problem and recommended that no such requirement be put in effect for 4 years before 2010. You're trying to do it in a matter of months. The proposal that you put clearly is an improvement that it is free. It is clearly an improvement that you would put this equipment in one place in a county. But let me point out that in Fulton County, there are dozens, literally dozens of places where people can go register to vote. Libraries,
Mr.
banks.
Bondurant, I'm going to have to, if you would, limit your comments to a few more seconds. I want to give you time to conclude, but I need to move to the next person so that they'll have their opportunity as well.
In short, you're putting the provision in one place will not solve the problem. You will not avoid litigation, both in state and federal court. And you will ultimately, in my view, not win that legislation with this bill. So I would urge you to leave well enough alone, let the federal court rule, as it ultimately will, the hearings on March 1st.
Thank you. Cass Robinson with the AARP, and I again want to ask that if we could limit our comments to about 3 minutes so that those who have signed up will each get to make their remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Cass Robinson, and I'm state president of AARP Georgia. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm also here wearing another hat I would like to disclose to you. I'm here on behalf of the Public Policy Advocacy Committee of the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta as well. So my comments will be on behalf of both organizations. As far as ARP is concerned and the Public Policy Committee of the Presbytery, this is a bill of major importance because of the adverse impact that it has on senior citizens and people who do not have adequate mobility. But it has a serious impact on seniors. My own mother, for example, has voted faithfully all of her life. She now would have great difficulty going from her residence to any central location to get this kind of voter ID. She does not have a driver's license, doesn't drive anymore. She has no valid photo ID at all. And she is someone who has always voted, takes it very seriously. To put this kind of burden on her can be multiplied by many thousands of Georgians. It really disenfranchises her and says you will no longer be able to exercise your American right to vote and to participate in your government. And that's not just her. She's just one example, but I know that one firsthand. This bill will disenfranchise thousands of Georgians because they will not be able to have access to the polls. It also has a double standard, as Mr. Bondurant has already pointed out. The standard for absentee voting is at one level, but the standard for voting at the polls is at a much higher level. And so far as I know, and the courts have seemed to verify this, there is no evidence that there is massive voter fraud at the polls. We're trying to fix a problem that simply does not exist. And when I was first elected to the General Assembly some 30 years ago, My predecessor took me under his wing and he said, let me give you one piece of advice. He said, it's hard to argue against fair. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the converse of that is also true. It's hard to argue for something that is unfair. This bill is not fair. It's not fair to seniors. It disenfranchises seniors, and it puts an unnecessary burden upon them to exercise their American freedom to vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to allow the Secretary of State's office to go ahead and speak, and then I'm going to allow DuBose Porter, so that if we run short on time, that we'll make sure that we get those two offices.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. My name is Kathy Rogers. I'm the Director of Elections for the Secretary of State's office. I'm also a former election official. I was the election official in Savannah, Georgia for a number of years. Just received the bill when we came in, so I've not yet had an opportunity to fully read through it, but I do feel like it's incumbent upon me to speak to you on behalf of Georgia's voter registrars. As you know, there are 159 registrars, one in each county. These are often the most understaffed, some of the smallest offices. They are the folks who have the hardest time getting county commissioners to give them any funding. I certainly appreciate the fact that you're willing to expand the opportunities to obtain a photo identification, and I think that will go far in allowing voters the opportunity to vote. However, I would respectfully request that you speak to your own local registrar in your county to see what their thoughts are on this legislation. There are many offices who currently already provide forms of identification, and they're set up to do so. It could be that there are other places that might be best served to issue this type of identification. Registration offices are sometimes not open 5 days a week, even though we would like for them to be. They are typically staffed by one, sometimes two people in the majority of counties. In Metro Atlanta, this will not be a problem for Metro Atlanta registration offices. However, in Metro Atlanta, you can more easily obtain a photo ID. House Bill 244 expanded absentee voting by mail to the fact that anyone can request an absentee ballot by mail for no excuse whatsoever. In studying other states who currently allow that practice, we believe that registrars could face up to an additional 50% of absentee ballots than what they have seen in the past. We already saw indications of this in the last November municipal elections. I would urge you to consider whether you would want the registrars to make their first priority issuing absentee ballots during that period of time or issuing photo IDs. There may be other offices which would be better served by that purpose. I'd also encourage you to carefully look at the language in which you laid out the type of documentation that's required. I know from dealing with county election officials and registration officials every day that if it's not specific, they will interpret it in 159 different manners. The part that says you'll provide documentation which shows your date of birth. In some counties, they will ask you for a birth certificate. In other counties, they will accept perhaps your family Bible. These items need to be very, very specific.
Thank you. Ms. Rogers, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we need to move on to the next. Representative Porter. Representative Porter, did you want to speak on the legislation? Well, I'm sorry. We had a note saying that we got a message saying that you wanted to speak on the legislation.
Well, I think we have represented on the committee very well by members of our caucus, but basically for the points that have been made, the points were made out in the case. What was at issue as far as voter fraud had more to do with what happened with the absentee ballots than it ever did with voter ID. The miscommunication with the people of Georgia has been, we have a type of ID that has been upheld now. It may not be the picture ID, which was declared that portion unconstitutional by the most recent case on the statute that was proposed last year. But Georgia has required some type of identification to register to vote and at the time you vote. What this also does away with is the affidavit that people can sign that simply says you are who you say you are. In America, we've always been innocent until proven guilty. You assume someone is who you are until they say they're not who they are. It's a basic premise that this attempt to restrict access to voting to the very fundamental of our constitutional rights as Americans, much less what's in the Georgia Constitution. So I don't think this fixes anything by trying to find a new way to do the same thing. The issue is it restricts certain ways from people to have access to voting. You currently have some type of identification that is been used so that anyone who wants to vote and is a valid voter can still go vote. But the bill before and what this would still restrict in some way that access. And if that's the case, we feel like it remains unconstitutional. And because of that, we've had to be opposed to it.
Thank you, Mr. Porter.
Thank you.
Joe Beasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm 69 years old. I grew up here in Fayette County, and there's been all kinds of schemes over that period of time to suppress voting. And I believe this is just simply another one of those schemes to suppress voting. I'm extremely surprised when you say it's been in the paper. Yeah, the eyes of the world, not only of the United States, but the eyes of the world is upon Georgia because of this nonsense. We talk about letting everybody vote, and American people put out billions of dollars to make sure that Iraqis can vote. Maybe what we need to do is to put some paint up, whatever, out so that people can vote, and then put their finger out so there won't be no fraud. But this clearly, and it has racial dimensions to it, and it's just disappointing, just disgusting. And I known Governor Perdue for a long time, and I had respect for him up until he got behind this piece of crap. And so the whole world to pull the cover off of you. Not only what Cass Robertson said, how it disenfranchises old people, but I'm old now too. But this is clear and simple voter suppression. And the whole world needs to see it for what it is. And you gang of Republicans that came in, just let me finish. You gang of Republicans come in, and think you know it all. It's just another kind of lynch mob mentality to try to disenfranchise people. And we're very, very disappointed that you all would this kind of cabal here in the state of Georgia, and while we're trying to push the whole world, including Iraq, vote, everybody vote, please. And this is just a lie. This is a subterfuge, and it's something that I hope that the whole country, whole nation, whole world can see that you're trying to do away with democracy in Georgia, and I hope you fail.
Maggie Garrett with the ACLU.
Good afternoon. My name is Maggie Garrett. I'm with the ACLU of Georgia, and I'm their legislative counsel. And I'm going to be very brief. I think most people who have spoken have made a lot of the points that I would like to make today, so I won't make you sit through it again. The ACLU of Georgia, of course, supports having fair elections, but I think it's important to realize that requiring photo IDs at the polls do not necessarily ensure fair elections. There's no evidence in Georgia. There's been no evidence shown. In the court case, the judge found that no evidence had been shown that there is voter fraud caused by people showing up at the polls and impersonating voters. Evidence of that simply does not exist. Therefore, a bill that requires a photo ID at the polls deters voters but does not stop fraud. It's as simple as that. And so that's why we don't support these bills. We didn't support the bill last year, and we don't support this bill. I agree with the people who have testified previously that this is an improvement to last year's bill, but it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't go far enough to protect people who are going to be prevented from voting. So it doesn't protect people on the public policy points, but also it doesn't go far enough to address what the judge said made this bill, the previous bill, unconstitutional. And I just want to make one point I think it's worth repeating. Earlier, someone testified and they said that in absentee ballots, the photo ID there is really your signature because you can compare that signature with what's in the registrar's office. And I think it's really simple to think about the same thing can be done for people who are voting in person. If you don't have a photo ID, rather than making someone jump through all of these hoops to get the photo ID, what you should do is have a provisional ballot where someone can sign. It's a provisional ballot, and then the registrar compares that signature with another signature. If it's good enough for absentee ballots, it should be good enough for voting at the polls, and you shouldn't require that person to have to come back again with a photo ID. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Faye Cofield.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Faye Cofield, and I am the chairwoman of the Criminal Justice Committee of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. And while many of you will wonder why someone who specializes in issues of criminal justice is here, I must tell you the following. The greatest freedom for all Americans and all people throughout the world is the ability to elect those people who will represent them, and that is each one of you. You represent us, and we should all be able to have a say in who sits there. Now, my greatest concern is that I'm old enough, and I participated in the civil rights movement of the 1950s up to today. And I will tell you that there was really no problem when we integrated schools. There was a little bit of violence. But the greatest violence and the greatest deaths occurred when we attempted to register people to vote. And I take voting very seriously because I realize that the march from Selma to Montgomery, where we lost people, that began with the right to vote. We have 3 dead Mississippians in Philadelphia. Mississippi just resolved a case. That case had to do with the right to vote. Viola LaRusso was killed because she wanted to register people to vote. So I do not take the right to vote as being a very minor thing. I too see this as no more than a veiled attempt to disenfranchise people. I have an aunt that is 98 years old. She has voted in every election that she has been allowed by law to vote. I recently found out that neither her nor my uncle have a, quote, valid piece of ID. That little Mickey Mouse piece that he just showed you that he claims is going to be a valid piece of ID to vote. Since he used this laptop right here, it can be bootlegged. It can be bootlegged by any little kid in the first year of computer school. I got this the other day. This came from the aquarium. It allows me to go in. It has my picture. Hava has 17 pieces of ID. There has been absolutely no testimony by anybody that there is any means of voter fraud at the polls. It doesn't happen at the polls. It happens in the cemeteries of rural Georgia, where the main thrust of this bill comes from, that people in the graveyard, been dead a whole bunch of years, is still on the polls, have never been taken off the polls, and are still allowed to vote. Now here is my concern. We have lost over 2,000 soldiers in Iraq for the right for the Iraqians to vote. And as Joe Beasley said, all you have to do in Iraq is to show up, stick your finger in some ink, and you can vote. what makes it worse and what nobody has addressed right here is that if I went to the polls, as black as I am, if I walked into the polls in the embassy here and said, my daddy was born in Iraq, I would not have to show anything and I would be able to vote in the Iraq elections. Voting is very serious. I take it very seriously. I take this as no more than an attempt to disenfranchise those people who may not agree with the people who sponsor the bill. That is the old, the young, minority groups, females, people who don't have any type of ID. Now, the story that I heard someone say, well, you can walk into Walmart and you have to show photo ID. I could walk into Walmart with this card from the aquarium, which is a piece of picture ID, and I probably could cash a check, but I can't vote. Now, another thing that no one has addressed, no one has told us the percentage of Americans that register at the registrar's office, because you can register at the library. Would you put machines in the library so that they can take your picture? And those places that issue photo ID cards from the library, can we use those to vote? The amazing thing is that if you worked at Walmart and all you had was your Walmart ID, you would not be able to vote. If you went to Morehouse and you only had a student ID and you had an electric bill with your name on it showing that you were living in Georgia and you were a registered voter, you would not be able to vote. Voting is very serious, and I resent, like has been said, the idea that you bring a bill in here right now, expect everybody to vote on it, and you don't recognize the importance of voting. And I mean, there are over 1 million people who don't even take the time to go vote. We are only talking about those who are registered and who want to go to the polls. And I ask you to turn down this bill. Hava has set up the 17 pieces of identification. No one has showed that anybody, there has not been one case of anybody going to the polls and being told they voted unless they were told they voted absenteeism. And when you guys get serious, like has been said, and stop all these dead people from voting, then maybe we can come back to this bill. Thank you very much, and y'all have a blessed day.
Secretary of State's office like to make any comment about the dead people voting? Let's move on. But I'd like to talk to you further about that to make sure that those people are being removed from the voters list. And I believe that they are being removed from the voters list, and that office is handled under a different political party. Thank you. All right, at this time, do we have any further discussion on the legislation from the members of the committee? Representative Oliver, would you?
At appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, or in whatever format you would like, I wish to delay a vote on this until another committee is scheduled. I feel obligated to talk to my registrar about how he or she is going to define page 4, line 37, about the person's state of birth.
Representative Oliver, if I understand you, then you are making a motion that we postpone further consideration of this piece of legislation.
Yes, sir.
Is there a second? Second. All of those in favor of postponing further consideration, let's take a roll call on this. Please signify by raising your hand. We've got Brooks, Oliver. All opposed? Motion's failed. Do I have another motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we have to pass on Senate Bill 84.
Second.
Okay. All right, we've got a motion and a second. Yes, sir.
To
Representative Powell has asked to make a motion to amend it, and it will be prior to passing. No, prior to. Okay. Thank you. Representative Powell, what is your...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I have an amendment to this. My concern is that, yes, while this is a great step forward as far as getting a voter ID card, one of the concerns that I see in here is that still you're going to have some people that are going to have problems getting this the credentials as far as to get the ID. Now, what I've done is I've got a proposal here on page 4, section E. And this would take care of a great amount of concerns. And I'm sorry that because I did not have this bill in time to have this drafted, I'm going to have to read this language. And the purpose of this, it says, the Board of Registrars shall issue a Georgia voter's identification card to any person who presents one or more types of identification referred to in order to register to vote under law. What this does, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, that if a person is registered to vote, or they're going to register to vote, if they qualify under the HAVA provisions to register to vote, then they should be able to get that voter ID at that point. Quite simple.
Second.
All right, Representative Powell has a motion on the table. Representative Oliver has seconded it. All those in favor signify by raising your hand.
Would you please repeat the motion? I mean, the amendment?
Be glad to. Jeff, would you like to read this?
It'd be striking the present language contained, it's basically subsection E on page 4, striking that language and inserting instead, the Board of Registrars shall issue a Georgia voter identification card to any person who presents one or more types of identification referenced in order to register to vote under Georgia law.
So basically what you do is if anyone wants to register to vote, they've already provided those provisions. So if they've already met the requirements to register to vote, then they should have already met the requirements to get a voter ID.
The amendment also says shall, and I think it would have significant impact on the cost statewide. But we'll vote on your motion. You've had a proper motion and a second. All those in favor of Mr. Powell's motion signify by raising your hand. All opposed? I think it's straight down. All right. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to ask that we suspend any more voting at this time until we can hear the rest of the presentation from the Secretary of State's office. Ms. Rogers was cut off. I mean, we're not pressed for time here. These are the folks who actually have to implement this law. Could we hear the rest of her presentation?
That was a secondary accusation by a citizen towards the Secretary of State's office, and we are under somewhat of a time limit. Chairman O'Neill of Ways and Means and myself, we both have a vote to deliver a tax cut to citizens of Georgia at 3:30.
I'm not concerned about the statement that was made from the audience. I'm concerned about when Elaine Rogers was at the table giving her presentation. She did not have the opportunity to finish, and the registrars are the folks who will have to, they're where the rubber meets the road. And I would like to hear the rest of what she has to say. I can't believe that it's very long, but this is an important issue.
Representative, we have a motion and a second on the table. I'm going to make a substitute motion that we amend the bill on page 5, line 33, to say that the act shall become effective upon its approval by the governor or its becoming law without such approval. Can I have a second on that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Point of order.
Any opposed? What's your point of order?
You didn't call the vote on the amendment that I had.
I'm sorry, Representative Powell has suggested that we did not vote on. Yes,
Yeah, we did.
yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yes, we did. I'm sorry. Did you get the vote?
It was 7-3 in favor of yours.
All right. The motion is passed, 7-3. This meeting's adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, we didn't have a vote on
We voted do pass as amended. Representative O'Neill. We voted. Okay. Let's clarify this. There's a motion. Do pass.
And I'd like to amend that motion to include the amendment that passed, so.
He offered a substitute motion, right?
As amended.
As amended.
As amended.
So his text person.
As amended.
So we're good.
We voted do pass. So we're good. Legislative Council has advised that the motion was proper.
That's what I thought.
That's right.
Because I had mayor letter.
Do pass as amended. Okay.
Come on, Mr. Burmeister. I'm one Negro that both of our campaigns.
And,
The only thing we changed was the effective date to be upon the signing of the governor or upon duly becoming law by not being signed. All in favor signify by raising your hand. All opposed? Thank you. I apologize for the confusion.
To note, all your committee members were still present and voted.
Now, if there's going to be change that, I assume you're wanting to do the committee report